Hello and welcome to the Celtic Way morning briefing for Friday, June the 10th. With me today is Alison McConnell. How are we today, Alison?
I'm good, thanks, Sean. The sun's shining, our washing's out. All good.
Pretty grey clouds down here in Inverclyde, to be honest. I don't know. Don't know if I like the look of that, especially when I'm about to knock off for a week. So that's not ideal. But before we get to our first topic, there's actually several topics today. As usual, we bit of housekeeping. So as you can see on the screen just now, we're sponsored by the One Football app. The link is in the description, and it's basically, as Tony says every other day, it's a one-stop shop for your football news, fixture stats, scores, stories, all of that stuff. It's on Apple and Android stores. It's also completely free. And even better than that, when it comes to free stuff, is running along the bottom there, which is our special offer of 30 days of full access to the website for absolutely nothing. So if you go to www.celticway.co.uk/subscribe, it's pretty easy to sign up. And I'll also put the link in the comments now. So, Alison, it's exactly a year ago today that Celtic announced the appointment of a certain Ange Postecoglou as manager. I'm seeing a lot of comments on socials and stuff that although maybe at the time it was a combination of kind of being baffled, disappointed, sometimes intrigued, etc., so many people now claim Postecoglou is their favourite Celtic manager of their lifetimes. I know it's only a season in, but what would you say is his biggest achievement in that year to lead people to that kind of conclusion?
I think there's probably a number of different threads that you could pull on there, but ultimately, I think it's obviously winning the league. I think that for any Celtic manager who's coming in, after the league title's been lost to Rangers, the immediate challenge is to win the title back. So I think that would be first and foremost. He done what would have been the ultimate ambition, but I think you would have to say that there were other strands there. I think he comes across very well. I think he spoke well from the off. I think we all know the circus that had gone on after Neil Lennon had left, and then you had the very public courting of Eddie Howe, and then that collapsing, and the perception was very much at the time that he was second choice, that he'd come in, that no one really knew him. I think you can qualify it by saying that there were COVID restrictions still in place, but the Friday afternoon that he was unveiled at Celtic Park for his inaugural press conference, it was it was three men and a dog at Celtic Park outside. He didn't have the fanfare that greeted Brendan Rodgers or that greeted Martin O'Neill or even Neil Lennon when he was first appointed. It was a very low-key appointment. I think there was lots of question marks about it, lots of raised eyebrows, but I think how he conducted himself from that very first meeting and that very first public discourse endeared him hugely to the Celtic support. Remember, that day he spoke very eloquently about his background, about the affinity he felt with the club, purely because of the fact he'd been a refugee, the relationship he'd been with his dad, the migration from Greece as a family to Australia, and the hard graft of his parents. And I think it probably resonated with a lot of people in Glasgow, maybe not first generation, but maybe second and third generation who would have grown up with very similar conversations and very similar backgrounds of watching parents slog pretty hard and continuously to make a better life for their kids. And I think he spoke particularly well. I think it was an immediate endearment, but ultimately, you're going to be judged by what you do in the park. But I think he definitely drew supporters in that first day, and he bought himself enough credit, I think, even when it was a rocky start, because of the philosophy that he'd preached and how he wanted to play football. And I think there were signs of it very early on. The second thing I would say is the signings he made quickly were a success. I think he brought in players that made a difference and made a difference immediately. Thinking about Joe Hart, who came in and made a difference right away. Kyogo, who came in and made a difference. And I think there was always an appreciation that he'd inherited a very chaotic situation. He inherited a squad that needed to be rebuilt. He inherited a team whose morale had gone. And I think very quickly you saw foundations going into place. And from September onwards, I think he really kicked on. I think you could see the team starting to build momentum, starting to develop a winning formula. You could see the change in culture and the change in attitude. And I think then again, when you got to January and further signings again were successful immediately, and then to go top of the league and overhaul that 6-point deficit, I think his stock is it a high at the minute. The challenge, of course, will be to continue to keep building.
I think David Gillespie comes in with a good comment here that I think really does apply to the majority of fans that weren't from Australia and Japan, that already were familiar with them in a way that most people, if not all people over here, weren't. That they did try to say it. That's who I will constantly give credit to, because there's always, when somebody has a wee bit of success after initial doubts, there's always a bit of revisionism. I was always on board, that kind of stuff. But the guys, certainly the ones that kind of come on here all the time and elsewhere on socials and stuff from down under in Japan, they were adamant, like, give this guy the chance. He will make you love him, that kind of thing. There's a few comments here about what his biggest achievement might be in that year. David Bradley saying winning the league, which is essentially the way that you started saying that there, Alison, because it was against the odds and the job they had to do. Brian Roberts mentioning that he'd done it without his own staff, which is also makes it a massive achievement in itself. There's several things in David Ferguson, the biggest and best quickest rebuild in Scottish football history, potentially, maybe.
Martin O'Neill in the
potentially.
First ever winning season.
For me, I think it's potentially the kind of the totality of it uniting the club in a way that just wasn't there than the season before. And the manner in which he's done it, in terms of implementing a philosophy, yes, but the fact that philosophy seems to extend beyond the pitch. I mean, he said himself in an interview that he doesn't want the season just past to have been a full stop. So knowing me as you do, Alison, I'll suggest he uses a comma or a semicolon, because I think he's got plenty still to left to right, hasn't he?
Absolutely, and I'm sure it's a very different challenge this season. I think your first challenge is to go in, restore calm, restore order. Mm-hmm. I think if you present a winning team on the pitch, I think so much else fades into the background. So much else just becomes mute. And if you think about when it's not going well, you have all kind of conversations about directors of football or heads of scouting or analysis technicians and a modern structure and heads of recruitment and where it's going wrong. I think you present a winning team and suddenly all that goes quiet. All people are really concerned about are results on the pitch, essentially. So I think he has delivered a winning team. They are now league champions. They also claimed a League Cup. I think it becomes a different challenge again this season. One, to defend that status as the champions, and two, now you have the possibility of Champions League football and what you can do in a European context. And I think if there was a disappointment from last season, it would have been the form within Europe. And I think the expectation might have been for more on that front. I think this season more will be expected in a European arena, and the challenge will be how to cope with that while also maintaining this domestic grip that Celtic re-established. If you look over the course of the last 10, 11 seasons, you know, Celtic have been the dominant force within Scottish football. It's about sustaining that again, whilst also building and progressing and trying to compete in a European sense.
We've got a couple of comments coming in. David Ferguson taking issue with your Martin O'Neill thing, saying he didn't have to replace 80% of his team squad, still won a treble in his first season, right enough. Again, David Ferguson, imagine if Jota and Carter Vickers were announced on the show. That's why I'm looking at the corner all the time. I see my phone flashing with Twitter notifications, and I'm thinking it better not be that, or it better be that, I suppose. But that I mean, that kind of topic, what's his biggest achievement, and specifically what you mentioned there about the Champions League and trying to make an impact there, that leads us nicely onto the second topic, which is another landmark today. It's officially open, the transfer window, that is. So in order for Ange Postecoglou to make sure that it isn't a full stop, as he said, recruitment will be key, won't it, Alison? In that respect, we all know there's a list of potentially 5, 6, sometimes people even say more positions and players that fans want, and probably that Ange himself wants too. But for our purposes, let's try make a tough decision by giving our top 3 transfer window priorities. Ideally, that don't include Carter Vickers and Jota, but I think that's everybody's number one, isn't it?
I think it has to be your number one. I think if Cameron Carter-Vickers says that he's going elsewhere, you have an immediate headache because there is a hole there that needs to be filled at the centre of defence. I think Christopher Julian's future looks questionable at the club, given the way the season ended, just given his demeanour on the final day of the season and the lack of game time over the course of the last few months. And I would say the same for Jota. If both of these players don't look like signing, then I think both of those positions are immediate priorities. So I think while I take your point about saying let's try and look beyond them, I think it's very difficult until you know what's going to happen there. So I would say Jota and Cameron Carter-Vickers are probably the number one priority because they leave a considerable hole if they're not going to sign. Second of all, for me, I think would be a midfield almost enforcer. You know, a kind of combative midfielder, a midfielder that I'm always going to say in the Scott Brown mould, a Victor Wanyama mould, just someone that can get the tackles and do the dirty job, which I think might ease some of the defensive burden at times, and Callum McGregor might enable them to play in a more forward role at times. And the third one, I think you're not going to like this one, would be cover at left back.
Surely not. No, I agree with that, to be honest. I think for me, basically what you say there is Carter Vickers and Jota 1 and 2, and then the combination of both of them for 3. But for me, trying to not make it Carter Vickers and Jota, that's the caveat. It is those two, and you're right to point out that impacts so many of the other moves that they could make if they don't sign. But for me, if trying to avoid just saying Carter Vickers and Jota, I think a new midfielder is my number one. I think preferably combining athletic and technical attributes, whether that be to cover for McGregor at the 6 or compete with Matt O'Reilly, Rayo Hatate and David Turnbull to play one of the 8s. I think that is a big place that needs to be strengthened. Now, there will sometimes be comments that there always is about Ideguchi getting a shot, sometimes even McCarthy getting a shot. We spoke about him last week, Alison. I think they still need another one. I still think there's someone in there that there's a gap for that. 2, it probably is a new left back, Alison. Actually, you might be surprised to hear me say. Might pain me to throw this one in there a wee bit, but ultimately, I have always said, no matter how much I defend Greg Taylor, if you can do better than what you've got in any position, then you do it. That said, it is Taylor's jersey just now, and ideally, if you bring in another left back, it's one who offers that top tier athleticism for the Champions League that Taylor doesn't have, because it's unlikely for me that they'll find someone who actually takes to that inverted role, like he did. So I think you go for the gap that he can't fill, basically, and you try and complement it in that way. After that, another centre back, and I think that goes for no matter what happens with Carter Vickers for me. On the face of it, when you think about it, if Carter Vickers signs, you've got him, Starfelt, Welsh, and Julian, with the option to call on the likes of Boston Lowell from the B team. That's actually a fair amount of depth, but when you look at it with a wee bit of context, given, as you say, Julian's future is uncertain, and right now Carter Vickers isn't a Celtic player, and Starfelt was injured for a bit, you're kind of going, well, maybe need one regardless. Add in Welsh's lack of game time that will become a concern if Carter Vickers signs and Starfelt's there. You can kind of see where I'm coming from. I think you need another centre back regardless, preferably a left footer.
Yeah, I think I'd probably agree with that, and I do think Christopher Julian will probably move on. I thought his body language was very interesting the last day of the season when the players were taking a lap of honour and walking around the pitch at the day the trophy was presented, and I think you could maybe say part of that might just be due to feeling a bit out of it when you've not played, you've not made a contribution over the course of the campaign that you you don't really feel as though you want to be front and centre when you've not contributed.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought he was interesting. I thought he really hung back a bit and kind of took a walk around the perimeter of the park on his own later on. Yeah, I think big question marks about whether he'll still be at the club come the start of the season.
This isn't so much a transfer as it is seemingly advocating for keeping him. David Bradley's fancies Ange to get a Yeti going. I think this is a conversation from last season, isn't it, Alison? That's a kind of that was a conversation around a Yeti this time last year.
Yeah, I don't see Yeti having a significant role to play at Celtic at all. I think he got his chance at times last season. I'm not sure he really grasped it or took it. I'd be surprised if he's still at the club come the start of the campaign.
No, I'm the same. I done a quick kind of where Celtic need to strengthen, and I think a third striking option is somewhere they could look to strengthen. It's not going to be, as I even said, they're the top 3 priority or anything, but I do think that they could do with another striker, because looking at it purely from a depth point of view, as I always do, Maida can cover central striker, Abada can cover central striker. You've got Kyogo and Yakimakis to rotate the minutes, but if you're in a situation like you were the season just passed where one or both is injured, do you really want to be taking people who probably would start, specifically Maida, on the wings to cover that role when you could have a third striking option there to maybe fill that gap? I don't think it's a Yeti, but I think it is something to consider.
Yeah, I take your point. I think they are fairly well covered in that area, but as you saw last season, it doesn't take much to suddenly feel as though you're exposed and that you've got limited options. I think getting to that point might have to hinge on what else is done in the window. I think Carter, Vickers and Jota, I think everything, there's a domino effect. I think so much depends on what happens with them just now over the next couple of weeks, which is why I wrote that piece at the start of the week saying Celtic can't really afford to hang on too long. They really need to have an indication about where it's going and what direction that is, because I think other signings depend on what happens with those areas of the pitch.
I'm just putting this up because I think it's you mentioned Barkas getting shipped out on loan, and it was a certain kind of human element that you feel sorry for him a wee bit, that kind of thing. What William says here is, I actually hope he does. I hope he does have a blinder when he's out on loan, both because it means that someone will probably buy him and his stock will rise again a wee bit, but two, just because it is never nice seeing a player struggle.
Completely agree. I think you would want him to go and do well. I think he came in very difficult circumstances to Celtic. You know, it hasn't worked. I think there's probably a variety of different reasons why it didn't work. But one, it's in Celtic's best interest that he goes and has a very positive loan spell for exactly the reasons that you've just mentioned. And two, just for his own sense of worth, I think he's clearly a good goalkeeper. It didn't fit at Celtic. It's not to say it's not going to fit elsewhere. He was a Champions League goalkeeper. He was an international goalkeeper. For many reasons, there were issues at Celtic, and you never saw that authority from him that I think you need from a goalkeeper, but you would like to think that he could recapture it somewhere.
He was also an international goalkeeper at one point, which takes me to the next section. Internationally, I can confirm that neither Kyogo Furuhashi or Daisen Maida are playing for Japan. They're on the bench in their Kirin Cup semi-final against Ghana, which is kicking off in about half an hour. But there are other Celts going to be involved internationally. There's an intriguing one later today, actually, Alison, that's not senior level. It's Denmark under-21s against Scotland under-21s, which of course means in all likelihood Matt O'Reilly versus Stephen Welsh. Now O'Reilly, of course, has been training with the Danish senior squad too. I referred to kind of earlier when I was talking about the centre-backs that any game time for Stephen Welsh is good. So I'll maybe be trying my best to watch that if I can finish on time, as it's a 5 o'clock kick-off, I think, and it's on BBC Scotland. But they're not the only ones on duty. Leila Bada's Israel play Albania tonight, 7:45 kick-off, UK time, obviously. Josip Juranovic could play again. This would be, if he plays, this would be his third straight game, and he played 90 minutes in the last 2 games. As Croatia take on Denmark, that's the same time. And then over the weekend, which I've obviously taken to doing the last 2 Fridays, just letting you know who's playing. Over the weekend, we've got Cameron Carter-Vickers, kinda, if you want to count him. USA play Grenada at 3 a.m. Saturday morning, which you might be up for, you might not be. Then obviously the kind of big one, you wrote a column on one of these players, Alison. You've got Cal McGregor, Anthony Ralston, David Turnbull and Greg Taylor. Any or all of some of those will be involved as Scotland play Ireland on Saturday evening at 5 o'clock. And then Georgios Giacomakis, who got a rest the other night, his Greece play Kosovo on Sunday at 7:45. So any of those standing out to you, Alison? It's probably Scotland, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the Scotland game obviously has some intrigue. I think they get their Nations League campaign off to a decent start the other night, and I think Anthony Ralston should consider himself a shoe-in for keeping that jersey for the game tomorrow night. So it'll be interesting to see just what the starting lineup is. I think Callum McGregor still going. It's just clocking up the minutes there. I wonder if he just might be given a bit of a rest, or whether he would welcome a rest come the game in the Aviva tomorrow night. But I think Anthony Ralston has done enough to deserve to keep his place for that one.
I don't think Scotland can afford to rest McGregor just now, to be honest. I think given it's Ireland, I know Ireland just get beat off Armenia and Scotland beat Armenia, but it doesn't necessarily work that because they beat Armenia, they'll beat Ireland, that kind of thing. I think McGregor, if he's going to get rested, it will be the second Armenia game. I don't actually know if he'll get rested at all, Alison. This is a topic we keep coming back to, but I just don't see an avenue for him.
I would agree with you. But I just wonder if it's a fairly comfortable afternoon. Not that I think it might be against Ireland, but I just think if Scotland were in top, would there maybe be scope to take him off and just give him some kind of break?
Now, the last kind of topic, which is arguably the worst kept secret in football, which was Celtic's new away kit, which was leaked about 3-4 weeks ago. We've had a couple of comments about that. Beach Boy's not loving it. He thinks Adidas have been a bit of a letdown the second and third strips. I actually thought, not the season just finished, but the disaster season. I thought the strips that season were really, really nice, but ultimately it's one of those ones nobody will want to remember that season, so therefore the strips will probably go out of fashion pretty quickly too. But for me, it's only a small thing really, isn't it, Alison, in the grand scheme of things? But I said back when it was leaked a few weeks ago when we were asked about it on one of the briefings, I think the term I used was it's honking. But although there's still definite kind of mint humbugs after 8 mint vibes from it, I actually think it's nicer than I first thought now when I see the whole thing. Any thoughts on it?
I've no thoughts on it whatsoever. No. Honestly, I can't get excited about stuff like this. I'm sorry. It's just I think they're functional. I think they're overpriced.
They're definitely overpriced. I'll say that.
Hang on this time next year and you'll get it for a tenner.
Aye, exactly. I've actually got a pal who routinely did that. Just waited and got it the season after. A couple of comments about them and about the strip in general. David Gillespie, I think that echoes a lot of supporters' feelings on strips in general these days, as well as the cost, Alison, as you said, but they like it sponsorless. It's just there's an element of a throwback to seeing a strip nowadays without a sponsor. Simon Fedeni, it looks a belter. I'll respectfully disagree on that, but that will take us nicely into the weekend. I think, Alison. Before we head off, as I say, remember you can pick up 30 days of full access to the website for free just now, and that will cover you for what should be a really interesting few weeks of transfers, and then obviously we'll gear up for pre-season after that. There'll be scouting stuff, continued analysis of the Celtic squad as it stands just now, what it could be, and more big interviews, including a cracker that's coming out this weekend. There'll be features, all of that kind of stuff. I've put the comments for you again. But as usual, thanks a lot for your comments, everyone. They're very much appreciated. Thanks for your contribution, Alison, as well. I am off for a few days now, but Tony and Alison will be here for you from Monday. So everybody enjoy your weekend, guys.
Take care.